The Honda HR-V has just been updated again, but you wouldn't be able to tell that it has been unless you're sitting where I am. Yep, the engine is still the same. The transmission, no, still the same. And you guessed it, the drive experience is still the same. And I'm in the RS model, which is the sportiest version of the HR-V, and I'll get to what differentiates it a little bit later. But before we delve any deeper into the 2021 Honda HR-V, make sure if you're watching on YouTube, hit like, hit subscribe, share this video with your friends, and also hit the bell notification icon to stay up to date with all our latest content. Now let me show you around the Honda HR-V and tell you exactly what's changed. The big news is right here. Yes, Honda Australia has finally added a touchscreen media system with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring. That might not seem like such a big deal to some people out there, but as someone who's just handed back a long-term HR-V, which I had for 6 months and disliked even more every single time I drove it because of the old media screen, this is heaven sent. The new screen is the same size as the previous one, a 7-inch touchscreen, and instead of having the USB port up here where the cord could be a little bit messy, it's now down here so it can be tucked out of the way. And for those who like sat-nav built into their cars, there's bad news because this new screen doesn't have GPS nav. Instead, you've just got to rely on your phone's apps, and they'll mirror up on the screen if you use Google Maps or Apple Maps or Android or whatever app you need to use, it'll be on the screen instead. While the smartphone mirroring tech is definitely an advantage, the screen itself is not terrific. The actual menus inside the screen aren't as intuitive as some of the rivals. It's not as big as some of its competitors, and it also looks a little bit fuzzy, and that's a bit of a Honda trait. I don't know how they managed to do it, but it just doesn't look as good as it could. Otherwise, inside the cabin, the storage is pretty good. There's a pair of cup holders here with adjustable height levels, so you could put a bottle in there if you prefer. There's also a covered center console bin. There's this section down here, which I never really use that much, but apparently it's great for a handbag. And there are also bottle holders in the doors. It's a pretty thoughtful cabin, but there's still a few things that make it look a little bit dated. Sure, the materials are all quite nice, but they don't look that special. And there's no digital speedo, which is a disappointment. Now let's take a look in the back seat. The back seat is the reason you buy a Honda HR-V. That might sound silly because it's not a limousine or anything, but it is supremely practical. Let me show you. These are magic seats. Now, they allow you to create a massive amount of space back here. Except that one didn't lock in. So in here you can store someone my size or some pot plants or something like that. But what if you want to store something long and flat? Well, you can put the seat base down and flip down the backrest. And then you've got this massive space that extends all the way through to the boot. It's very good. Now, what about actual human space? Well, let me show you. I'll just slid in here. This seat is set for my driving position. I'm 182 centimeters or 6 foot in the old money, and there's plenty of knee room back here. It's very comfortable. There's even good headroom, although you do have to watch yourself getting in and out if you're a bit taller because of that. In terms of the accommodation back here, it is pretty comfortable. You can fit 3 adults across if you need to, but if you've got kids, there are dual ISOFIX anchor points and 3 top tether points as well. There's a pair of mat pockets, which is good. There are door pockets, but they're a bit awkwardly shaped, so they're not that easy to use. And there's no center cup holder armrest situation in here at all. There is a bottle holder down in front of your feet. There's a 12-volt power outlet, but there is no USB charge ports in the back, which is a bit disappointing because more and more cars these days are offering that ability to keep your kids charged up on the road trip. Not so in the HR-V, but otherwise it's quite a nice place to be. Now, let's check out the boot. Before I show you the cargo area, let's just consider how compact the Honda HR-V is. Yes, it is at the upper end of the small SUV size scale, but it's still very diminutive and city friendly in its size. And that's why so many people buy it. The boot space on offer is excellent, and it just furthers the claim of the Honda HR-V as being the most practical small SUV you can buy. With the rear seats in place, there's 437 litres of cargo space, and under the boot floor there's a space-saver spare wheel. Here's what that means in terms of luggage capacity. Fold down those rear seats flat and you get a huge space. At the other end of the car, nothing has changed under the bonnet of the HR-V since it launched back in 2014. It still runs a 1.8 litre four-cylinder engine which has reasonable power and torque outputs for the class, but is certainly no firecracker. You might remember I mentioned that I'm in the RS model. It's the third variant up a 4-model range. So it goes VTI, VTI-S, RS, and top spec VTI LX. So, what's the HR-V like to drive? Let's start with the engine. It's a 1.8 litre four-cylinder. There's nothing too exciting about that, and it's got a CVT automatic transmission team to it. And there's certainly nothing exciting about that. The CVT really just robs you of much enjoyment. If there was any to be had from this engine, well, it sort of throttles it, and it just doesn't excite me at all. I guess that might matter to you, or maybe it won't. But if you are looking for a sporty version of the HR-V, the engine isn't going to appeal to you in this car. What might appeal to you is the steering in the RS, which is a variable ratio steering rack. And what that means is it's just a bit more direct and a bit quicker to change directions. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's more feel to the steering, and sure, it's not hot hatch-like, but it's mostly pretty enjoyable. I mean, it's the most enjoyable part of the drive experience, at least. The suspension is unchanged between this model and the other versions in the HR-V range, but you do get 18-inch wheels, which are the biggest in the HR-V lineup, and that means that the ride can be a little bit bouncy and bumpy, particularly the front end. If you hit repetitive bumps, you'll notice that it can bounce around a little bit. It's not very resolved. And because you've got those big 18-inch wheels with low-profile tyres, you will notice some road raw intrusion into the cabin as well, particularly on coarse chip surfaces like you find in most of country Australia. But if the surfaces are smooth, if you're around town or maybe on the freeway, progress won't be too much of an issue. It'll get along fine, the ride will be decent in those sorts of situations, and it's a predictable car to drive. But safety is where the HR-V really falls short compared to its rivals. There's no high-speed auto emergency braking, and the AEB that is fitted across the range doesn't detect pedestrians or cyclists. There's no active lane keeping assistance, no traditional blind spot monitoring, no rear cross traffic alert, and no rear AEB either. There is a reversing camera and Honda's lane watch camera. If you buy the top spec, you get forward collision warning, lane departure warning, and auto high beam lights. But that's not even as much tech as some rivals offer in their base models. You might also be wondering about ownership prospects for the HR-V. It has a 5-year warranty and cap price servicing for up to 10 years or 100,000 Ks. Read the review at the CarsGuide site to find out more. The updated 2021 Honda HR-V has certainly gone some of the way to addressing our concerns about the shortfalls that the previous model offered, namely the media screen, which is much better now than it ever was. But there's still some stuff that we'd like to see added. Essentially, the HR-V is a very cleverly packaged small SUV, but it's starting to feel quite dated, and it's let down by a lack of active safety technology that most of its rivals now have across their entire ranges. So, you might be wondering what score I'm giving it. Well, here it is.